Hello everyone and welcome back to another episode of The Damage Report, still under lockdown. Thank you for joining us today. We have a particular treat for you. Joining us on the show today, attorney and author of Staying in the Game, Adrienne Lawrence. Welcome to The Damage Report.
Hey, thank you for having me.
Very excited to have you on, and in particular for some of the news today where your legal expertise is going to do a lot of work to make me look a little bit less ill-informed about some of the stories we're going to be talking about, so I'm very excited for that. And we've got a lot of news we're going to be talking about. We've got some updates on the coronavirus, which, what do you know, is an absolute continuing disaster. We've got Michael Flynn, another little wrinkle in his case, facial recognition doing what facial recognition is going to do. And then finally, we get to talk about lobster. It's been a long time.
Yes, it has. I miss lobster.
Yeah, I don't know the last time I had it. Well, like Jim Gaffigan always says, I miss butter, and lobster's a great thing to put butter on.
Oh, it's a straight vehicle for butter. I agree.
Exactly. Before we launch into the stories, I want to give people a little bit of time to sort of join us here. We haven't really talked much about the experience of this pandemic and, being at home and then the wave of protests. How has the past couple of months been for you?
Oh, gosh. It has been an experience, in part because, it's like we all, as Black people, we all lived in a certain world where no one really listened to us. And then having this kind of thing blow up recently, it just essentially throws your oppression in your face, and then having people defend it. And then on top of that, the coronavirus, which kind of hit the back burner. But it's like 2020 keeps on delivering.
Yeah.
It's a very special place.
Yeah. Any predictions what you think 2020 is going to hit us with next?
Jesus, I hope 2021. I want this to be over.
Yeah.
That's all. That's the best thing I got going. No.
Yeah. Unfortunately, you're not going to get there until we pass probably devastating wildfire season in California. Hurricanes are going to start to hit. I think 2020 still got some tricks in store for us, let alone the run-up to the 2020 election is going to be, crazy. And I am now, how, we're still waiting to find out in Kentucky, what's happening with all the absentee ballots. And right now, Booker's up in the Senate race. Why is anyone assuming that the same thing isn't going to happen with the general election? That we'll know night of who won? Why? Why are we assuming that? Get ready to go to sleep not knowing who's going to be president when you wake up.
And to be honest, the trauma, I may not even endure it. I want to be there for people, but 2016 was so jarring to begin with. I just don't know if I could take it anymore.
Yeah.
I don't know.
It's the worst year. They're all bad, but they're getting worse. Okay, everyone who's already here waiting for the show to begin, thank you so much for joining us. Feel free to hit the like button, share the stream, let more people know that the show is active. We will be following your comments and Twitch comments and super chats and your tweets at #TDRLive and responding to you throughout. But we've got a absolutely packed show that I'm very excited to launch into. So, Adrienne, why don't we do this?
Let's do it.
Okay. We reported yesterday that 3 states in the Northeast are instituting a new policy of effectively quarantining people who come in from a number of U.S. states that have higher than average infection rates and all of that. We have Phil Murphy of New Jersey, we've got Ned Lamont of Connecticut, and Cuomo of New York announcing that they're going to be doing these quarantines. And if you do not self-quarantine, if you come in from one of these really hard hit by coronavirus states, you're going to face fines. And so when Donald Trump announced that he needed to go to New Jersey, admittedly for the very important purposes of visiting his golf course in Bedminster, he announced, no, I'm not going to be doing that. And the defense that was provided was that the president of the United States is not a civilian, which I found to be interesting because while he is commander-in-chief of the U.S. military, he's never been a member of the military, and we have prided ourselves for hundreds of years in America for having civilian control of the military. So suddenly it looks like it's not anymore. He has become an avatar of the military when it's convenient for the purposes of quarantines.
Oh, well, when it's convenient for golf as well, because we know he's going there to be on official duty so that, he can swing and miss as he's done just about everything. But it just really speaks to his level of ignorance and indignance and how much he does not care for other people. The fact that he is going to parade through town, bringing in Secret Service and a bunch of other outsiders who, what we saw earlier this week, that he had, I think, like 8 people working with him on the Tulsa team, including 2 Secret Service who tested positive for CV-19.
Yes.
Come on.
No, you're totally right. And I'm glad that you brought that up, because we also found out in the last day that dozens of Secret Service agents are now being told to self-quarantine because they might have been exposed to all these. Again, for a totally needless rally.
Yep.
About as needless as an extra round of golf, I would probably say. And the idea that Donald Trump doesn't feel bound by any of these restrictions or regulations or bits of advice, advisory notices, those sorts of things. We also, remember, we're just coming out of his Arizona rally, and they put out a statement about the fact that Donald Trump and his team and all of the rally attendees had broken local ordinance requiring the use of masks, which carries a fine. Judd Deere, the White House spokesman, said, with regard to Arizona, the White House followed its COVID mitigation plan to ensure the president did not come into contact with anyone who was symptomatic or had not been tested. And I love the honesty of that statement, because it's just about his own personal safety.
Exactly. Not any of the other people that he's essentially corralled a bunch of nonsense people and let them feel licensed to go ahead and disobey the law so that, they can all come and see him talk and he can have a nice, college teen Klan rally. And we are never going to leave our houses again. I don't want to be here.
I know, and the issue is it's the irresponsibility of enough people that causes the crisis to continue. But really think about like if I did, I decide I'm sick of this quarantine, Adrian. I'm sick of it. I want to have a live show, and I'm going to have a live show, and I'm going to berate everyone at that live show into not wearing a mask. I'll be far away from them. I'm not getting coronavirus, but I want all of you to sit in the stands. Like, think about what that would say about me. That I had browbeaten people into exposing themselves to an illness. And look, we'll find out in 2 weeks that some people got coronavirus at that rally. I have no doubt. They didn't even do temperature checks, which they had said in advance they would. And again, this is a church. The needless cruelty in regards to the health and well-being of the people that went there. But we're more than 3 months into coronavirus. He's had various stances on the pandemic from the beginning. None of them have been productive. But now it's an outright aggression against virtually anything to protect against future loss of life.
Oh, absolutely. And it just really speaks to the fact that we live in a society where certain people believe that the rules don't apply to them and they live accordingly. And how much it always ends up impacting the rest of us. And we are at a loss because those people are flagrant in their violations of the law. Man, this is so on par for who he is. And no, he will not hit par.
Yeah. I like how you loop that back around to the Bedminster there. That's nice.
Do what I can.
Donald Trump has had his strategy when it comes to coronavirus, pretend that it wasn't going to hit. Once it did, pretend that it's going to go away soon. Once it didn't, just pretend that it doesn't exist at all. And that might have seemed like a good strategy for a while. But in terms of his approval rating, it doesn't seem to be working out too well. As of the most recent poll I saw, Reuters Ipsos poll, he has a 37% approval rating on the response to the coronavirus. That is his lowest rating since he started collecting Americans' opinions in early March. 58% now disapprove. And I understand that they're pointing out that that's the worst rating he's had, but imagine how low the bar is that you could fail to this level and 37% of the country be like, yes, sign me up for another pandemic. I want that man in charge.
And that's what scares me the most, because I know that certain like percentage of these people are educated and informed, but there are things that Trump essentially, maybe they value in him largely, racism, sexism, oppression. And so they want to back him. But then there are people who are just, as we've seen on a lot of these kind of shows or whatnot, they're just ignorant. And they don't have the information. They also may not necessarily have the ability to fully process and analyze. But either way, it's scary, very scary for the future of a country.
Yeah. You know what? Let's double down on very scary. I want to give them some more very scary, and also try to explain why maybe his approval rating is finally ticking down, even if the floor seems to be 1/3 of the country thinking he's doing a bang-up job. One reason, potentially, is that yesterday, the U.S. had the most coronavirus cases it's had. Not in the second spike or in a particular state, just overall. Worse than when New York was under full assault with over 36,000 cases reported in a single day. So that's scary, to your earlier point.
We have this cultural identity problem where we've always thought that, and to be honest, I think it's largely white America, has always thought that they're superior than other people. We are a world power. We're number one. We're all this stuff. So the idea that they can be told anything in terms of, hey, science says this, or hey, you should wear a mask. People aren't here for it and they won't listen to it. And it is so dangerous and scary for the rest of us, especially since we know it's Black people and brown people who end up suffering the most and are dying from COVID-19 rates higher than anybody else. And again, it just continues to show that some people don't think they need to listen to the rules, science, anything that is established in order to continue to serve themselves and their own personal interests. We are so incredibly selfish.
Yeah, you're at least 120% right. There's the disparate impact racially that COVID has already had, obviously. But then think about like the two big crises we're in at the same time and the conversations that different racial groups are having about rights being infringed. So you have the protests talking about it would be nice if you would finally stop killing us. That would be great. And then you have the mask protests, where if Publix makes me wear a mask, that is the greatest infringement on my rights imaginable. I should be allowed to spread a deadly illness. And if you stop me, you are a Nazi.
I really, you know what, and especially when people bring out the Constitution, and I'm like, you know what, the Constitution's got that whole, like, I don't know, life, liberty kind of stuff going on. So that's like group number one, trying to get that whole, we just want to keep our lives. And I am not aware of any part of the Constitution, and maybe I missed that day in law school, that said, you know, Publix can't regulate what I wear when I enter this private establishment. And it's wild that so many people will try to weaponize or point to the Constitution, a document that they've never read or tried to interpret in any way, in order to justify them not following the rules. Yeah. It's awesome.
Yeah. Just ridiculous. Okay, let's continue, see if we can come up with why he's down to 37%. One reason potentially is that we have been waiting for the federal government, obviously led by Donald Trump, to do something about the fact that cases are rising so precipitously in a number of different states, and they have done something. They are ending funding for community-based COVID test sites, most of them being in Texas. Now, look, you just see that headline and you think, okay, well, that sounds bad. But maybe they're not needed because Texas is doing really well in the pandemic. No. Up to almost 6,000 cases a day. That's where, like, now, admittedly, California is really high too. Slightly higher than that. But California is a lot bigger than Texas. Both of these states being hit so hard. And their move is to slow down the testing. What he implied jokingly he was going to do at his rally in Tulsa.
Exactly. And it's the thing that also gets me so much about Texas is like having Ted Cruz go out and get his little haircut and just say, we're good, we don't need to do this. And then now you have this spike and the federal funding is going to be withdrawn for these test centers. And you're out here now complaining, pushing back, saying it's wrong. We need funding for the test centers. Oh man, it just continues to be this cyclical element of just stupidity, active, egregious stupidity. And one thing that definitely, and I'd love to hear your thoughts on it, that gets me though, is, okay, so we have New York, Connecticut, New Jersey imposing fines for people who don't quarantine for 14 days after coming in. And like it's $2,000 for the first violation. I loathe the idea of any kind of set fines because you're going to, again, have that class of people who have the money and do not care. And so I don't know. I always love the idea of the fine being in proportion to maybe your income. And so because, hey, that might deter people where $2,000 otherwise isn't anything. Do you think that'd be worthwhile to get these people who think they are above the law to act right?
Yeah. I mean, look, I don't know exactly how you institute the scaling, but something like that has to happen because you're not even proposing a hypothetical. Trump has already said, I'm not going to do it. Find me if you want. Like it's already demonstrated exactly what you're saying. And yeah, so I get that they're going to have a fine, but think about this. You have a set fine that is going to hit people with the least resources hardest. Those people are already most exposed to the virus and already have the hardest time financing travel across the country. Yeah. It needs to be modified.
Absolutely.
I think you're 100% right. So one additional thing that I do want to throw onto here, especially as we're talking about, the rise in cases in these individual states, the rise in cases overall. If somebody watching this watches every day, I apologize. I know that I've been saying this literally every day, but while there's been a lot of misinformation that has had to be knocked down over the past few months, the most recent is the idea that the only reason cases are going up is because we're testing more. That is not the case. And every day I try to come up a new explanation for why that isn't the case. Here we've got a good one from covidtracking.org or .com that shows the percent change in a variety of different states of cases and tests over a 1 week period. And you can see that in the 4 states to the left, you have Arizona, Texas, Georgia, and California, testing did go up, but cases went up far faster. And in 3 states, Kentucky, Florida, and South Carolina, cases went up, including nearly 70% in Florida alone, while testing rates actually dropped. So that is not an explanation for why the cases are going up. It never was. It was certainly never an explanation for why hospitalizations are going up. The only silver lining is that so far deaths have not started to rise.
Yes.
But we also know that there's a 1 to 2 week lag in this. And so that theoretically could be coming in the near future.
Absolutely. And it's just this whole notion that if we don't test, we won't have increases in rates is kind of like, you can't see me, I'm not here. It's just so stupid.
Yeah.
And it's really sad, but we see the same thing going on in Brazil and these leaders who just engage in absolute shenanigans to our detriment.
And I know I've been saying this since the very beginning. It seems like if your whole thing is going to be presenting yourself as the strong man, the person who's actually going to defend the silent majority that's been forgotten by the elites and all that, don't you have to stop them from dying in mass numbers? Like, if you can't do that, what's the point of having the strong man? But they've figured out a way. They've, through the power of Fox News and right-wing media, they have convinced their base that even as they're dying, it's fake. It's not actually happening. You can ignore it. I know that you know someone who died, but they didn't actually die. Those numbers are inflated and all that. It's been an amazing coup of propaganda that they've been able to get done in the past few months.
No, absolutely. And then what scares me most is having these borders around us being shut down. And then those whispers that the EU is not going to allow Americans in. Because part of me is like, nah, I got to get out of here. I need the option if I can go somewhere. But so many nations are just they're not going to welcome us because we essentially didn't act right. And also, they didn't really like us anyways.
Yeah, that's true. And yeah, I know that like it's imminent that Trump is going to attack the EU for that. But can you blame him? Like, they're trying to stop infections from spiking again. Why would, unless they were to institute an Australia-style, forced 14-day quarantine or something like that, why would you allow Americans or Brazilians or Russians, any people from countries where the cases are rapidly rising once again? I mean, you can't risk it. It is literally a life and death choice.
Yep, and they can probably also see, essentially, maybe it was kind of this America's mentality of we don't want immigrants to come here, have babies and stay, that kind of thing. They can already see how the United States is breaking down and they don't want us to go there, have babies and stay. And so I think they're just like, nah, we good. We'll see you when we see you. We'll watch from here. But no, you people can't come. And it's unfortunate. I really think we were doing something good and we were moving in the right direction. And now the pendulum is swinging right on back and it's slapping us all in the face.
Exactly. And insult to injury, they're not going to admit that they were wrong. All the calls to reopen and you don't need the masks and social distancing isn't necessary and all the stuff that Fox News has been spreading on a daily basis. Sean Hannity is not going to stare into the camera and say, I have to admit I got it wrong. And people are dying, and I admit that. It's not going to happen.
We need to talk about a relatively new show called the Republic, or UNFTR. As a Young Turks fan, you already know that the government, the media, and corporations are constantly peddling lies that serve the interests of the rich and powerful. But now there's a podcast dedicated to unraveling those lies, debunking the conventional wisdom. In each episode of On the Republic, or UNFTR, the host delves into a different historical episode or topic that's generally misunderstood or purposely obfuscated by the so-called powers that be, featuring in-depth research, razor-sharp commentary, and just the right amount of vulgarity. The UNFTR podcast takes a sledgehammer to what you thought you knew about some of the nation's most sacred historical cows. But don't just take my word for it. The New York Times described UNFTR as consistently compelling and educational, aiming to challenge conventional wisdom and upend the historical narratives that were taught in school. For as the great philosopher Yoda once put it, "You must unlearn what you have learned." And that's true whether you're in Jedi training or you're uprooting and exposing all the propaganda and disinformation you've been fed over the course of your lifetime. So search for UNFDR in your podcast app today and get ready to get informed, angered, and entertained all at the same time.
So as the protests developed in cities across the country week by week, some people in an incredibly fake way called out those protests as being a really bad idea because hypothetically they could spur more coronavirus infections. Some people were legitimately concerned about the safety of protesters, particularly with pervasive footage of cops not wearing masks and getting right in the face of protesters. Obviously, that's a risk. Some people used it in a very politically biased way to try to nullify and negate the concerns of the protesters. But we have been waiting since then to find out, are we going to see a rise in coronavirus cases in places where these protests were their largest? And we don't have data from across the country just yet, but in New York City, we apparently are not seeing evidence that it was, a stimulus for more coronavirus. The city's daily COVID-19 indicators, cases, hospitalizations, and deaths in June have steadily declined to levels last seen in early March when the city hadn't yet shut down. You can see here daily case counts continuing to trend down. And this is while we've seen cases rising sharply in a number of other states that didn't necessarily have the pervasive protests, but did have people that forsook wearing masks and reopened prematurely and all of that. So, Adrian, we can't say for sure exactly what's going to happen, but this certainly seems like good news.
Oh, absolutely. I think there were probably more people hospitalized by police brutality from these protests than there were from people for COVID-19. And that also speaks a lot to our system. But, I do think a lot of people were afraid that being out there, being in close contact. But I do believe that the people who were advancing in the protests were also being pretty mindful of wearing masks and staying at a distance to a certain extent, of course. But, I think it's a really good sign. But it also speaks volumes to the areas where we're having this increase in the fact that they are not regarding any of the COVID-19 safety measures. And they really have no excuse.
Yeah. Yeah. And look, I agree with the protests that the distance thing was going to be rough. But look, I saw a lot of footage and universally the mask wearing was almost universal. I guess not to repeat myself, but and we shouldn't be surprised by that in the same way that if you go to a Trump rally and you bizarrely think that you should wear a mask, do it and see what the other people at the Trump rally say to you. Conversely, if you go to the protests and you're not wearing a mask, there's going to be a different sort of social pressure to not risk infecting people around you with a virus. So there's like this virtuous circle of once you have enough acceptance of the science, it spurs other people to do it. And that's why this is good news, but I don't find it to be particularly shocking. These people were being incredibly serious and responsible when it came to the pandemic, while also knowing that they can't miss an opportunity to, engage democratically, fight for their rights, draw attention to important issues and all of that.
Absolutely. And it's so funny, too. Just kind of the irony, the thought that you have people at Trump rallies not wearing a mask, but these are also the kind of people who are notorious for wearing hoods. So it just really, I don't know, it's something, it kind of sits with me where I'm like, really, yo? So now you don't want to cover your face? Oh, that's fun. Okay.
Exactly. And by the way, you mentioned the possibility that more people might in fact, be in the hospital as a result of the rampant police brutality we saw, in no small part in New York, by the way. Some of the most brutal acts with using their SUVs to try to run over people and all of that. We have coming earlier this week, late Tuesday night, the city's health department quietly released a report showing that the number of fatalities at the hands of the police was more than double what had been previously reported between 2010 and 2015, and the vast majority of unarmed people killed at the hands of the police were Black and Latino.
Sounds right.
Sounds right. Tragic, but not that surprising. Things are, at least for the near term, looking a little bit brighter for the legal prospects of Michael Flynn, formerly of the Trump administration, with the announcement that U.S. District Judge Emmett Sullivan must immediately dismiss the criminal case against President Trump's former National Security Advisor, Michael Flynn, and cannot scrutinize the Justice Department's decision to drop the long-running prosecution. That was ruled by a federal appeals court just yesterday. In a 2-1 decision, the court said it is not within the judge's power to prolong a prosecution or examine the government's motives in the politically charged case. So I am going to turn this over to Adrian. You are the legal expert. How significant is this ruling?
Okay, so first off, like, all of this is total legal porn, so I am so excited about it. Yes. So this ruling is extremely significant, and as John had mentioned, it's a 2-1 decision, and it was 2 GOP-appointed judges who ruled, and the dissenting, of course, I believe is an Obama appointee. But essentially, the important thing we have here is that the D.C. Circuit Court of Appeals, so the Court of Appeals in D.C., went ahead and they jumped a few steps. Mm-hmm. They didn't let District Court Judge Emmett Sullivan actually rule or decide on the matter, because that's generally what happens before you can ask the Court of Appeals to do something. You need a ruling from the district court, and that was not given here. So now the situation is that Judge Sullivan has stayed the case, and he's either going to petition for review en banc, meaning he's going to ask the entire Court of Appeals, all the judges that are seated, to re-review the decision that came out yesterday, or using the powers that be, he's just going to sit on it. And because I used to clerk at the D.C. Court of Appeals for the chief judge there. And so judges can do all sorts of things with cases based on their docket. You know, the legal system works on its own timing and schedule. So we'll see how it goes. But this is, there's a lot of flexing. And Sullivan is flexing hard. And the Court of Appeals really is out of pocket.
See, this is the difficult position. So I don't have, obviously I don't have the legal knowledge that you have. I certainly don't have the specific experience with this court. Like, so I can read about potential directions that this could go in, but I don't have the contextual knowledge to say what the likelihood of any particular path is. And so I understand that I'm trying to figure out how likely it is that Michael Flynn might effectively be done. This entire process might be closed out for him. If not, when will we know? Is there the possibility that Trump, who seems to have been trying to influence this thing from the outside, might just directly pardon him? I'm curious what you think the next, say, 6 months or so might look like for this case.
Okay, so right now the issue with Flynn is that the next move will be by Judge Sullivan. He's going to have to decide if he's going to ask the Court of Appeals, all of them, to review things, which would be en banc. So that's like the whole court decides. Mm-hmm. Or if he's going to use his powers as a judge to kind of just not do anything and let the case sit. And the thing is because, you know, we had Flynn pleading guilty twice to pretty much lying to the FBI about his Russian contacts, and DOJ wanted to dismiss the charges. So we don't have that full on hard conviction yet that Trump could actually go ahead and pardon. So essentially the person with the most power right now is Judge Sullivan. And so I could see him petitioning en banc, and the D.C. Circuit Court of Appeals. So the Court of Appeals there is, I think it's a majority Democratic appointed judges, and you only need a certain number of judges to agree to have it reviewed en banc. And so I could really see this going back to the Court of Appeals to re-review it, because the reality is that these, you know, 3 judges in this small little decision that came out yesterday, again, they jumped a step. And procedure is the most important thing in the court system. And so to not even let Sullivan make the decision initially is problematic. And so this is going to be such an important decision because everything about it that came out yesterday, it speaks to corruption, all of it, corruption. The fact that you're willing to not make Flynn follow the rules. Because regardless of the outcome, you've got to follow the rules to get there. And so it's problematic.
So I want to get your opinion on something that I've expressed my thoughts about for quite a while now. So as you said, he pleaded guilty twice to lying. The response from the very beginning from the right has been, this doesn't count. In fact, no lying in any of these investigations counts because it's just the result of a perjury trap. What do you think about that argument?
I think it's nonsense. The problem is, again, we have a society that has enjoyed certain people and living without accountability, being able to lie and never having to really face the music. And so the thought that he lied, I can understand the right and also just most powerful people, regardless of political party, being like shoulder shrugs. We essentially lie all the time. To hold us accountable for it, that's blasphemy. So, the reality that we're going to hold people accountable for their behavior is very new. And we see this right now in this recent Black Lives Matter uprising with some people really being called to task. But there's still really this ideology among a large segment of our community that they should never be held accountable for what they do.
Yeah.
And I see that.
So maybe I can get your response to this. As a result of this decision, Flynn called into Rush Limbaugh's radio show and called it, the decision, a great boost of confidence for the American people and our justice system. So my initial reaction was not the same as Michael Flynn's. When I see this and when I see apparently one of the prosecutors in the Roger Stone case saying that the Trump administration had been putting pressure on them to give him as minimal a sentence as possible, and even now the possibility that he could pardon Roger Stone looms large over that case. How would you characterize your confidence in our justice system under this administration?
Yikes. I do not have confidence in our justice system at all. I do think that the last bastion of hope would be our courts. Unfortunately, Trump has appointed more federal judges, I think, than any other president. And the vast majority of them have been privileged white men who are hyper unqualified, much like Trump himself. And so that is going to have a significant impact on all Americans as these decisions get put out that do not comport with the law, do not make sense, and really undermine the entire system we built. And our system was already very broken to begin with. But the law was really the last bastion of hope. And it's where I put a lot of my love and passion, because when you understand how it's supposed to work, it's very tough to watch it all be dismantled and for people to just willy-nilly do whatever they want to serve their friends. So yes, that might have been a soapbox of woe is me. I'm just like, it's exhausting. And it's interesting because attorneys have a high alcoholism rate. And one of the reasons I've always suspected that to be the case is because you know how the system should work. And you watch it be broken all the time. But at this level, it's insane. Yeah, man.
Yeah, I don't know if you saw, they just confirmed Trump's 200th federal judge. I don't know much about the individual. I've seen him, shockingly, it's a man, him described as a voting rights extremist, like an anti-voting rights extremist. And that's the thing, like, I think about, like, hypothetically, let's say that Trump loses in November or whatever. That's 200 landmines waiting to go off in cases stretching decades into the future.
That's right. And these individuals, they serve for life. Like, they don't have anywhere to go, so they can do just about anything they want. And the only check they have would be the courts above them, where Trump has already stacked other people in those spots. And so this is incredibly problematic. And the only thing we can really count on, which we all know they don't do anything really, is Congress. Because Congress is the one that can actually impeach a federal judge. But otherwise, nothing is going to happen. And these people are going to be here until their, last breath is taken. Mm-hmm. And And it is just mesmerizing to how much damage this man was able to do in 4 years. If he has another 4, nah, I don't know. I can't help you. I'm going to have to swim across some ocean to get somewhere else because I can't do this.
Well, quick question. You know a lot more about potential judges that could be, given promotions in your future. So who do you think he would replace Ruth Bader Ginsburg with?
Jesus Christ.
What conservative gargoyle?
Exactly. And the thing is you don't even need to be a lawyer to be on the Supreme Court.
Mm-hmm.
You want someone with a legal mind, but he could appoint one of his kids. Mm-hmm. Like, as long as, the Senate is good with it. And that's a very, very scary thing, but he will find someone who really speaks to his ignorance and ideology and is likely, a racist rapist. And the thing is, it's like with Scalia, I respected Scalia because his principles were his principles. He wasn't necessarily trying to, feed the system and to do hands off for friends. Like, he really believed what he said. Like, him and RBG were besties. But like the judges are putting on now, it's like, you've got no professional anything. Like, Kavanaugh is a joke. It's a frat boy. Get out of here.
Yeah, I don't know about you. I'm holding out for Judge Jeanine Pirro. I think that she's ready to do it. You wanted someone who speaks to his ignorance. She speaks to his ignorance with ignorance. So that's just perfect. Of course, he'll probably just end up going with some like 24-year-old activist in Talking Points USA or something like that. Just put whoever you want on there.
And it's like, oh man. And I actually feel bad for the other judges. Like the other, not the other full 8. I don't feel bad for Kavanaugh. But it's kind of like when you've been a legal mind, it's an intellectualism. Like, it's just, there's something sexy about being able to spar, even if you have a complete difference of opinion, but you can't spar with an everyday idiot. And just to think of how hard you work to get there, and then that man shows up, get out of here. Nah, yeah. I'd be so angry.
Let's talk about a man, Robert Julian Borshak Williams, who is just the latest individual to run afoul of the incredibly racially discriminatory face recognition software that is spreading across America and law enforcement to virtually everything it's being used now. So effectively what happened is at one point some theft had happened, some shoplifting of a few watches of a few $1,000s. And here is how it ended up roping in Robert Julian Borshak Williams. Investigators pulled a security video that had recorded an incident of shoplifting. Like I said, detectives zoomed in on the grainy footage and ran the person who appeared to be the suspect through facial recognition software. A hit came back about 25 miles northwest of Detroit. Then in January, police pulled up to Williams' home and arrested him while he stood on his front lawn in front of his wife and 2 daughters, aged 2 and 5, who cried as they watched their father being placed in the patrol call. As he's being arrested, his wife, Melissa Williams, wanted to know where police were taking her husband. One of the cops told her, Google it, which is just amazing. So he gets hauled in, and bear in mind, he didn't do anything wrong, and he's trying to convince these people that the grainy little security camera footage, great lenses they use on those, by the way, is not actually him. He says that in one interview, he held up a photo of the shoplifter next to his own face, after which one of the detectives said the computer must have gotten it wrong, which sounds like it should have been the end of the entire thing, but wasn't. The second piece of paper that they had was a close-up. The photo was blurry, but obviously not Mr. Williams. He picked up the image and held it next to his face and said, "No, this is not me. You think all black men look alike." And the issue, obviously, is that whether that cop did, the facial recognition definitely does. And so this has been so well demonstrated to see a person who was held for 30 hours when it was abundantly clear from the first look at the photo that it wasn't him. This is American law enforcement and tech.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, and the thing is, it's like a lot of people don't appreciate the fact that so many of these companies out here, especially tech, when they're making this facial recognition, it's a bunch of white people sitting in a room. Like, they can't fully appreciate black features and the differences in them. And even we have studies showing that eyewitness testimony that is interracial is very unreliable. And so when you have facial recognition, it's not good because it can't tell the difference between me and Nina Simone. Like, and as a result of that, cops are essentially weaponizing it as an excuse
Yes.
to give us a record, you know? And that's the thing of how does that impact you when you are sitting there like this man 30 hours? Like, what if it took them years to figure it out? What if you had to actually wage a full defense? You lose your job, your money, your income, your family, your house.
Mhm.
How do these people get away with this? And you have absolutely no recourse whatsoever. All they say is, oops.
Yeah. Yeah, and only because people make a big deal out of the case do they eventually scrub it entirely from your record. Initially, when they released him, like, I don't know all the technicalities, but they theoretically could have brought him back in. Like, they weren't even fundamentally, legally recognizing how wrong they had gotten it. And even if they hadn't done that, they hauled this guy away in front of his family in public. That is damaging in and of itself. Mm-hmm. And so, and I love that you
mentioned accused of something you did not do.
Mm-hmm.
And also, police have had a legacy of saying, oh, well, you look like someone who committed the crime, just as a way to harass you. Mm-hmm. Like, it's well known. And so it's just a way to continue to police us when we are living our everyday lives. And essentially just to power struggle, have fun, persecute. It's terrible.
And what I don't understand is, do they not want to actually catch the person that broke the law? Like,
no.
If you are harassing other people, you are fundamentally not getting any closer to actually solving the crime. That seems like not a good outcome for police, but they seem to be okay with it.
Yeah, no, police like to use their means and their power, not necessarily to do their job, as opposed to engage in power plays. And, you know, we all work in places. We see that same thing where you have a boss who is clearly not focused on doing the job as much as it is putting you in your place. Mm-hmm. So police love to do power exercises because the reality is they're still going to have a job even when they don't solve the crime.
Yeah.
So they don't care. Get out of here.
That's true. You know, I'm glad you mentioned, too, that before this, and still, obviously, when you have, witness testimony, that they get it wrong, too. The thing is, while those people probably never get in trouble, hypothetically, someone made a mistake. The way they've got it set up now with the computers, nobody made a mistake. It's just a computer. It's just an algorithm. Nobody did anything wrong. It's an amazing system that they've set up.
See, I definitely think tech got it wrong in the fact that they have no diversity whatsoever and they just don't give a damn. Yeah. And then police departments, same thing, to continue to enjoy that liberty because they don't do any cross checks because they don't care if it ends up ruining your life because you're black.
Yeah. And just to be clear, they have gotten it wrong from the very beginning. I mean that they have sort of escaped culpability, that it has now been distributed. But yeah, the entire thing, and it's not like nobody saw it coming. People have been raising concerns about this for so long and getting attacked for doing so. I still remember, maybe people remember, we talked about this on the damage report. It was last year, AOC, at one of these meetings with tech leaders, talked about racial discrimination in facial recognition, and she was roundly ridiculed by the right. Oh, AOC thinks laptops are racist. That's seriously the attacks that were waged against her. She was right then, and she's only being proven more right with every passing day.
Yes. And at least a quarter of the nation's law enforcement agencies have access to these facial recognition tools. And again, when I was younger, someone accused me of looking like someone that they said committed a crime, was dealing drugs or something. Mm-hmm. And just to be accused of something you didn't do, but also because I was just like this little perfect straight arrow, straight A kind of kid. It's so incredibly emotionally damaging when authorities just are willing to point a finger without even doing the due diligence of making sure that it's not you.
Yeah.
Or that it is actually you, I should say.
Yeah. Yeah, you would like to imagine that the people that we vest with the most power over life and death, literally, would have just the slightest bit of care for your fundamental humanity to want to make sure that it's actually you before they harm you, perhaps irreparably.
Exactly. But since they have qualified immunity, and again, they're not going to lose their job if they don't even do their job. It's complete and total, irrevocable, just power. Yeah. And it's so dangerous for those of us at the bottom of the totem pole.
Oh, there were so many super chats that I didn't see the Twitter section, but I see a note from Bart. This just broke according to the ACLU. Got to end the show on a hopeful note. Let me drag this in here. I don't know if it's going to be formatted right, but let's see. ACLU breaking. Members of Congress just introduced a bill to stop law enforcement use of face recognition technology. And the ACLU says no one should have to fear the government tracking and identifying your face wherever you go. No one, like our client Robert Williams, should have to fear being accused of a crime you never committed because of a flawed technology. Pass the long overdue bill. Thank you, Bart. That is very good news. I mean, we'll see what, the Congress ends up doing. But I'm glad. And again, AOC was mocked. It was like a 2-day news cycle of, look at this crazy AOC. She thinks computers are racist. No, it's demonstrated. She was interviewing people who were confirming that their studies had shown that. God, we are such an unserious country. But anyway, look, if this is a little bit of progress in the direction of getting rid of it, I'll take it. Let's talk about lobster. I did not expect that we would, but thanks to Donald Trump, that's what's on our plate today as a country. He tweeted yesterday, President Obama destroyed the lobster and fishing industry in Maine. Now it's back, bigger and better than anyone ever thought possible. Enjoy your lobstering and fishing. You could just write lobstering. We get what you mean with the lobstering. We don't think, oh, dress up like a lobster? No, you're catching lobster. We get what you don't need to put it in. Anyway, make lots of money. So why is he saying this? Why is the most powerful individual in the entire world talking about lobster? Well, it's because he was directing the Department of Agriculture to extend the more than $30 billion bailout fund that they put together as a sort of response to the trade war that Donald Trump launched us into for no reason, to now include the lobster industry rather than things like soybeans and all of that. And so they're going to be providing some of that to lobster fishermen, especially in Maine, who have been harmed by the trade war with China. Now, important context for this conversation. After Trump imposed tariffs on a wide range of Chinese products back in 2018, Beijing responded with a 25% levy on $34 billion worth of U.S. goods, which included American lobster. And as a result of that, Maine's lobster business found a ton of new work supplying China. That has harmed Maine lobsters. And Trump is saying, something about Obama. He ruined it. I'm good, though. What do you think about this?
I think that I'm probably still a little poor to afford lobster, but I remember what it tastes like, and that's nice. But in terms of this story, you know what? It's just unfortunate that there are so many people out there who are impacted by Trump's ignorance, because like you said, he got us into this nonsense trade war and then creating this $30 billion bailout program to compensate these farmers and whatnot. And the fact is that people are also disgruntled about even this bailout because it seems he's really directing it to states that can help him. And Maine being a swing state, they're going to get as much funding as they need while a lot of other states kind of sit and suffer. And it's all started from his kind of, ignorance and really just misdeeds, and everybody's going to suffer.
I'm curious. So I think you're probably right for the reason. I think the fact that a lot of the money had already gone to Midwest states that are going to be competitive, the fact that he's suddenly interested in Maine, has he said the word Maine since he became president before this? I don't know.
Does he know where Maine is?
Can he point it out on a map? I don't know. The only other potential explanation I can think of is because he is such a small, simple person in some ways. He had a trip to Maine and talked to some of these lobster fishermen not long ago. It was less than a month ago, I think. And actually, are you familiar with Sarah Cooper, who does the Trump impersonations? So she had an amazing one of Trump on how to lobster. It's great. You should go watch it, everybody. But so he sat down with some of these lobster fishermen, and they were telling him about how bad it is. And so he started riffing about the EU and China. And he's the sort of person that, he would get so focused on that he would suddenly turn the power and might of the U.S. government to dealing with it. So I don't know if it's the weird idiosyncrasies of him being such a weirdo, or likely you're right that it's a political calculation. But anyway, whatever it is, it's a needless expense. If he hadn't started the trade war, we wouldn't need to spend tens of billions of dollars bailing out so many different industries. Exactly.
And having Beijing responding with a 25% levy on, I think it was $34 billion worth of U.S. goods.
Mm-hmm.
And it just, I don't know. It's this is exactly who this man is. And it's why we are in trouble and why we are isolated and people aren't able to generate their income because, unfortunately, he stoked this mentality of a lot of Americans of the thought, we're a world power. We don't need anybody else. When no, it's a very symbiotic relationship. Mm-hmm. We need everyone else and they need us. But unfortunately, now they're telling us, nah, we don't need you, son. And it's not a good look.
I want to get your opinion. So it's election year, obviously. Trump needs to win re-election. I would say going into 2020, it looked really good for him. But he's had so many of these own goals, like continuing the trade war that's hurting the U.S. economy while trying to convince his base, this is me being strong. The coronavirus absolutely devastates us. He tries to get people to forget that it's actually happening. The economy is going to be hurt even more when the lockdowns have to come back because he didn't take it seriously. What do you think going into this general election about his strategy, these constant self-destructive policies? Do you think he's going to be able to surpass the effect of them and win re-election?
The thing is, I think that the loyal aspect of his base will forever be loyal. And there's nothing that he could do that will make those people not believe in him. I think you said, 37% approval rate. So that base isn't going to go anywhere. For anyone else who is questioning or kind of teetering on the fence or whatnot, I think these next few months that he's going to continue to hurt himself because unfortunately, as much as we were kind of coming at Biden for being kind of quiet through a lot of this, it's probably for the best that Biden remained quiet.
It's looking like that.
Otherwise, he could just, only hurt himself as opposed to letting Trump do his own damage to his own self. So it's just, I think that Trump will continue to do damage, but he's always going to have that loyal base. But the thing is, also feel like a lot of people will say that they don't back Trump, but then would go into a voting booth and go ahead and vote for him because they, prefer white supremacy more.
Yeah.
So I really don't know what to think, but I feel like I'm completely and totally traumatized by the last 4 years.
And you certainly don't sound like you're just coasting into the election anyway. And you might have answered this here. I'm curious, the 30%, 31, 37, whatever it is, if over 100,000 people dying from coronavirus doesn't get through to them, if him needlessly hurting the economy, including industries that are overwhelmingly in red states, what is the core that it's resting on? Is it just the racism? Is it the racist dog whistles and the constant taking it back to that and the culture war stuff and all of that? Do you think that's sort of the foundation that it's resting on?
Yeah. Oh, yeah. People don't realize how powerful that is because, one of the important components of white supremacy is also the patriarchy and male supremacy. And so people don't realize, number one, the vast majority of us in this world, well, especially white America, has built their identity on this this kind of notion of superiority, whether it's explicit or implicit. You're used to being talked to a certain way. For instance, there is a wonderful company that I'm working with right now where I was hosting the videos, but now they brought me in as a consultant to go over, maybe racial elements and let them know. And so I'm having a very candid conversation with the older white male CEO, and he asked me for the truth. So I gave him the real, and he said, no one's ever spoken to me this way. And I wasn't insulting him in any form or fashion, but the fact that I was just completely and totally direct and candid, because there is this unfortunate aspect of our society where people have been shielded from a lot of the truth, and also they haven't necessarily been treated the way the rest of us are treated and getting the real. They've been coddled to a certain extent. And a lot of our population wants to keep it that way.
Yeah.
And so I think that is extremely important for a number of people who really support his base, even if it will mean that you lose money, that you financially and economically suffer. And there has been a lot of research on this too, because the reality is that people need to feel like they're better than someone.
Yeah.
And and it doesn't just have to be race, it can be gender, it can be all sorts of things. But people would even take less money in their paycheck as long as it meant that they are still making more than the person next to them.
Yeah, I think you're 100% right.
It's unfortunate.
Yeah. Well, Adrienne, those are our stories. But before you go, I wanted to let people know you have a book. Can you tell us about Staying in the Game?
All right. So I wrote Staying in the Game, the playbook for beating workplace sexual harassment, because most people don't know what sexual harassment is, but it definitely impacts men and women, and you need a strategy for it because, again, especially right now with a lot of these uprisings and push to, hey, distribute the power, there's going to be a lot of people out there who are going to want to kind of get the power back, and so they're going to use workplace sexual harassment to get to you, which is a lot of come-ons and put-downs and marginalizing you. And so it's a first of its kind because no one's ever put anything out there like that for fear of retaliation. And I'm out here like, whatever. Like, nah, people need to know what the score is. Let's do this. Yeah. So yeah, that's good. And a lot of people seem to like it a lot, which is neat.
Awesome. That is great. Adrienne, thank you so much for joining us.
Awesome. Thank you.
Have a good day and stay safe out there, especially with coronavirus spreading as fast as it is in California right now.
Seriously.
Okay, we'll talk soon.
I had intended to get up here and talk about how racist Robert E. Lee was, but I'm going to talk about you, Connie. Sitting over there shopping while we talking about Robert E. Lee. This is a picture of you shopping while we talking about racism and history in this country. Only white members of this board got up while we were up here talking too, because you don't give a damn, and it's clear. But I'm going to tell you what the slaves, my ancestors, said about Robert E. Lee, since you don't know history, sister. Let me tell you that they said when he got the plantation, after he got off the field where 27,000 people died at Gettysburg, Connie, Robert E. Lee was a brutal slave master. Not only did when he whooped the slaves, he said, lay it on them hard. After he said, lay it on them hard, he said, put brine on them so it'll burn them. That's what Robert E. Lee did. And you set your arrogant self in here and sit on there shopping while the pain and the hurt of the people of this community is on display because you don't give a damn and you should resign. You should have resigned 2 years ago when you choked a white man in his house. You should have resigned 2 weeks ago when you got on TV and said foolishness. And you should walk out of here and resign and never come back because you are the example of racism in this community. You are horrible. Now to the rest of the board. You have an obligation to the people of this community, and 81% of them are black. And do you need a Klan rally outside, Mr. Goday, before you end it? Because holding it up means that you put that building in jeopardy. You do, sir. Because all over the country, they're burning stuff down. And black folks in this city have stood with protesters. I ain't seen you elected officials out there with them, making sure that nothing goes south in Baton Rouge. It's been folks in this community who give a damn, not just when it's comfortable, but every time. And 4 years ago, we came down here. Mr. Drake, they say you're a good man. Be a good man. Black folks say you're a good man. White folks say you're a good man. Your legacy is attached to tonight, brother. Your legacy. Now, let me say to the black members of the board, it's the most solidarity I've seen out of y'all in forever. Let's keep it at. Let's stand on this moving forward. Because we don't need to apologize for Connie, Evelyn. She showed you who she was when she was sitting next to you while you were talking shopping. You don't need another example. Now, when do we as Baton Rouge stop being in 1856? If you want to name the building after somebody, how about PBS Pinchback, the first black governor of the state of Louisiana, when he was governor during Reconstruction? You want another name? Oscar Dunn, who was the lieutenant governor of the state of Louisiana in the 1860s, that gave the right for Darius Landis and Don Collins and Evelyn Ware Jackson and Tremel Howard to get here. You want to name it after somebody from Reconstruction? Name it after the people who fought for abolition of slavery. If you want to name it after somebody, honor the right people, the people who are on the right side of history. But it's your ancestor that the school is named after. So you're holding on to your heritage. But we built this joint for free. And we've done begging you to do what's right.
Thank you, sir.
We are very lucky to be joined by the individual featured in that video. Also, the publisher of the Rouge collection, Gary Chambers. Welcome to the Damage Report.
Thank you for having me, John. I appreciate it, brother.
We're glad to have you on. Everyone on the team was just overwhelmed by the video, and I'm curious, what were you intending? Like, obviously, you had to confront this incredibly disrespectful display, but what had you been intending when you went that day to speak?
For me, I just thought it was important that people saw the disregard that Connie Bernard had for the people in this community. And so that was what my intent was. It has been my history in Baton Rouge to show up at council meetings or school board meetings and challenge people. Rarely do you see one where someone is as disrespectful as Ms. Bernard was that night. And I thought it was just important that she be confronted there, not that we wait for another moment, because when you give people a pass like that, they get to build their own narrative, right? And I didn't want a false narrative to lead what was true in that moment, which was she didn't care what the black people in that room had to say that night.
Yeah. Well, and live in the video, I'm sure, to her chagrin, you had the full narrative of who she was, some of the incidents she's been involved in recently. Like, I'm curious, I know that you mentioned multiple instances there, but Connie Bernard, like, have you had previous interactions with her yourself? Is this really demonstrative of who she is as an elected official?
So I think that what you see is what you get with Connie. We have certainly had a run-in before. I called for Connie's resignation 2 years ago when she went into that young man's home and assaulted him. And I just believe that she should have resigned then because it was a poor reflection of leadership, right? Not many people agreed with me then. Connie was at the time the vice president of the local school board. She resigned from the vice presidency of the school board at that time, but remained on the board. And so she goes to court next month. Hopefully she's convicted of that. And if there's a conviction, if she doesn't choose to resign before then, maybe that conviction will help us get a resignation.
And so all this came about as a result of an effort, like efforts we have going on around the country around military bases, statues, and other things that are named after these Confederate, generals or whatever, KKK leaders even. What is the argument that was made in opposition to changing the name of Lee High School?
Well, Ms. Bernard got on TV and said, basically, we should look up Robert E. Lee's history. And so, I had intended on coming that night to share his history with her before I saw her doing shopping on the internet, right? But she was the only school board member this time defending Lee publicly. And I think the backlash was so strong before this was even a national story. There was just local backlash about her getting on TV defending Robert E. Lee. And so people showed up in a pandemic to a school board meeting because they wanted to ensure that their voices were heard that night. And my video went viral, but there were other people there that night who were adamant that Ms. Bernard was wrong in her position, including school board members who were sitting there with her.
Yeah, and so she set out the challenge for you to go and learn the history, which you demonstrated in the video, and everyone should watch the full video, that you definitely did know his history and that it is a very dark history. Do you think, does she actually know anything about who he actually is?
So I think that for many people in the Deep South, let me be very blunt when I say this. For many white people in the Deep South, they look at that period of history with rosier eyes, right? There's a subdivision in Baton Rouge named Adelia that's opening here. It's $300,000 homes, $400,000 homes. It's built on a plantation, and they named the subdivision after the slave owner's wife, Adelia, right?
Oh.
This is in 2020 that people are purchasing lots and homes. And there's the big house, the plantation house is in the center of the subdivision, right? Where people are gonna turn this into like a clubhouse for the neighborhood and celebrate this white woman who was married to a man. And if you read the slave narrative, and I don't like to use the word slaves because those are the ancestors of people like me. And I don't want to disregard them as just a piece of property. But our ancestors in their slave narrative said that the owner of that particular plantation, that he put gas lights around the house so that he could work his slaves day and night. And that's how brutal of a picture of time that was. And for white people in the South, they glorify that period of time. And so for Connie Bernard, it doesn't matter the human expense of black people. It is the glorification of industry and business is how they look at it from that time period. And it's unfortunate and it's a lie.
Yeah. And so having it's Robert E. Lee High School initially, eventually stripped down to Lee. They say, and I'm sure we've heard so many people
throughout history, but especially recently, saying if you change the names, if you take down the statues, then you're forgetting your history. I'm sure that you've had to talk to some of these people. Have you ever had a conversation with one of these people making a case like that and come away from it thinking that this is a person who's just genuinely interested in history, like sort of a buff that watches documentaries and is genuinely interested in this sort of thing?
No. I walk away from that conversation knowing that these people are just committed to wanting to see these monuments. It is not a matter of them wanting to respect history, because we go to museums, right? There's the USS Kidd here in Baton Rouge. That's a ship on the river that you can pay a fee and go, and you can see anything on that ship that you want to see, right? That's a museum. It honors a portion of history. We should honor history in museums, regardless of whether I agree with that history or not, right? If someone wants to open a Confederate museum and tell the history of the Confederacy in that museum, I have no issue with you buying a private piece of property and telling that story. What I don't believe is that we should take taxpayer-funded dollars to uphold monuments to people who were traitors to the Union, right? They literally tried to destroy this nation. When you look at Robert E. Lee, 20,000+ Confederate soldiers died at Gettysburg and another 20,000 Union soldiers. And they put monuments up to this man as if he did something noble when thousands of Americans died as a result of this. You don't honor the people who caused this type of friction that now has us 150 years later still dealing with the residue of that situation.
Yeah. Well, apparently, from what I'm reading, the efforts to try to get them to change the name is succeeding, and we're now entering in a period where they're going to consider different names. I saw that the superintendent suggested a few replacement names, including naming it after Congressman John Lewis, Barack Obama, Mildred Loving, Cesar Chavez, as well as a few others. Do you have a preference, or was it really just we got to change the name to something?
So for me personally, I would love for the name of the school to be PBS Pinchback High. I am not going to be appointed to the renaming committee because I've caused all this friction. And so you can imagine that they don't want me at the meeting. But I think that PBS Pinchback did some phenomenal things in his life. He was the president of the Louisiana Senate. He was then lieutenant governor, and then he became governor as a black man in the 1800s. And it was 100 years in America before another black man would assume a governor's office, right? And for me, that man should be etched in history because he something from that period of time that is man, it just makes you stick your chest out, right? That a guy against unsurmountable odds would end up in this position. And as a black man, it just says that anything is possible if you can come right out of slavery, unify a community of people, run for office, and then become one of the most powerful people in the country, in the place where they literally held your parents as property. We should name some stuff after him all over America, right? And people should know his story because his story is an American story of courage and bravery and transformation and hope, not Robert E. Lee, right? And so while I appreciate the legacies of John Lewis and Barack Obama and anyone else that they name, I think that people have made tremendous contributions, but I think we should stay within that time period, right? And honor those people from that time period, because otherwise we've allowed them to be erased from the story of who we are.
I think that is an absolutely amazing suggestion. I think any genuine history buffs are gonna love it. Maybe not some of those who just claim it.
So there are gonna be a lot of folks who send in a lot of requests. They've kind of done this form where you can go on and fill out and make recommendations of who you think the name should be after. And so we'll see. It'll be in the next few weeks though. Awesome.
Well, it's good to see this progress, even if very late in the game. Gary Chambers, we appreciate you joining us on the show and for what you said at the meeting. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
As protesters push for the police to be reformed, what does it look like when you try to reform the police? What are some of the obstacles that you face? Joining us now to break it down is a former Obama White House aide and Democratic council member of the Montgomery City Council, Will Jawando. Welcome to the Damage Report.
Thank you. Thanks for having me.
Glad to have you on. We love the write-up in the Washington Post about your 1.5-year-long effort to get some reform through, and we'd love to have your perspective on what that's actually like. So tell us a little bit about your experience.
Yeah, it's one of those things where I've been working on this a long time. It's funny, I was thinking of it last night. 17 years ago, when I was a first-year law student, I spent a summer working at the NAACP legal department, and my job was to call police departments from around the country and get copies of their use of force policies. As you know, like 17 years ago and now, depending on where you are in the country, the 18,000 plus local law enforcement agencies all have different policies and procedures around use of force, which is one of the problems. And so, you can imagine I'm calling, hi, this is Will Jawando from NAACP, and calling Tuscaloosa, Alabama for their use of force policy. There wasn't a warm reception everywhere I called, but you fast forward to today, and unfortunately, we're still seeing some of these same issues. And so when I got on the council, I was very, as a civil rights lawyer, I was very aware of these issues. We had just lost an unarmed black man in our county, Robert White, who just died 2 years ago, June 11th, who was shot 7 times. He was walking in his neighborhood and the officer pursued him because he had a ripped jacket. So we know that these things continue to happen, whether it's obviously George Floyd or Breonna Taylor, and the names goes on, Freddie Taylor here in Maryland, Freddie Gray, excuse me, here in Maryland. So the first bill I introduced was the Law Enforcement Trust and Transparency Act, which required independent investigations when police kill a resident. So they shouldn't be investigating themselves. And then that report should be made public so we can learn from it and hopefully change policy and prevent it. And so that passed. It was uphill battle. It was, the department didn't like it, the unions didn't like it, but we got it done. And it's one of those many recommendations in President Obama's 21st Century Policing Task Force that you should have independent investigations and prosecutorial decisions. So that's just one step. It's been a long journey trying to point out other things about our fundamentally flawed view of criminal justice and policing, which, as you probably know, and maybe viewers don't, has its roots in slave patrols in the South that were used to gather up enslaved individuals. And then after Reconstruction, police, many politicians like myself, local elected officials said, well, good thing we have the police to keep black folks in line. That's the history and the legacy. So it's been an uphill battle, but we're making progress, and I think we have some opportunities to do some things right now.
So I want to make this real for our viewers. So you describe it as an uphill battle, and you talk about the department didn't like it, the union didn't like it. So what does that mean in practice? What form does the pressure come in? If you introduce this bill, and we're not talking about with that bill fundamental, structural, from the foundation up reform of everything having to do with law enforcement. We're talking about a seemingly fairly reasonable reform. Right. What was that pressure? How did they make themselves known?
Well, there's this culture that if you question, and it's an unhealthy culture, if you question anything about police practice, you immediately are anti-police and you're anti-officers who put their life on the line. So we had slid into this, and if we're not careful, we'll slide back into this false dichotomy that you can say we're thankful our officers risk their lives to protect and serve, and that's what they should be doing, protect and serve. But and also that we need to disentangle systemic racism from the system of policing, which has always exists, for 400 years. And so that, there was immediately a Facebook group with thousands of, which is mentioned in the story in the Post, that was created saying that I hated the police. Oh, wow. And we got, threatening calls, and I was in meetings with the police chief when he was yelling at me, and you don't understand, this is my department, and that kind of thing. And so you fight both institutional and external forces, because there was this culture that's still present with some folks that you can't question anything. And we vest a lot of power in our police, the right to take life, the right to deprive people rather of liberty. That is a serious power. And with serious power should come serious transparency and serious accountability. So I think those are some of the institutional forces that many people are up against when trying to do real reform.
Yeah. So you describe, putting forward even just super common sense reform. You'll be pitched as a person that fundamentally hates the police. I totally get that. Don't find it surprising. With the movement that we've seen over the past couple of months, does that help that situation where you have a wider, broader swath of the population rethinking fundamentally some things regarding the police? Or do you think that it actually might sort of harden those battle lines because the traditional defenders of the police now feel like, well, they're really coming for the police now? How do you see that affecting legislative efforts in the future?
Yeah, it's a great question. I think it's mixed and it's too early to tell. We are in a moment right now where if you look at public polling, the vast majority of Americans think some things need to change in policing. Obviously, African Americans, people of color have known that for a while. And so you do have a moment where you're looking at these multiracial, multi-ethnic, intergenerational protests and demonstrations across the world, not just the country. You have a moment when you have some opportunity. The question is, how long will it last, and what will we get to the fundamental issues? And that's why I think the defund police, the reallocation of resources, the shifting of core responsibilities, things like services to end and prevent homelessness and mental health out of policing. And investing in other areas. Those are getting police out of schools. We have a $3 million school resource officer program that I'd like to remove. Those are things that are really gonna test whether this is a real moment and we can get fundamental change, or we're just gonna do very important accountability reforms. I have a bill to change our use of force policy to make the standard for deadly use of force necessary, not reasonable, make it higher and as a last resort. And that's important, but you need to do these more fundamental shifts in responsibilities and incentives in the police department and who we hire, how we evaluate those folks. That all needs to happen. And the question I have, and what I'm concerned about, and why I'm trying to push really hard now, is will we have the staying power? Will the public be with us as we continue to try to disentangle a 400+ year system that has built up and it has been entrenched over time?
That is really the question, and I guess we're gonna have to see. It's certainly a good time for election year. A lot of people paying attention, and I hope that it does have the endurance necessary to push those reforms through. Maybe in the near future we can touch base again and see some more of the legislative efforts and evaluate then. But Will, we appreciate you joining us.
Thanks for having me, and thanks for covering the issue.
Thank you.
Thanks for listening to the full episode of The Damage Report. Support our work, listen ad-free, access members-only bonus content, and more by subscribing to Apple Podcasts at apple.co/TYT. I'm your host, John Adarola. I'll see you soon.